Today I'm going to be doing a Baldur's Gate 3 Cantrips tier list. I noticed that Cephalopocalypse was, I think, redoing all his tier lists, and I wanted to get in and get some done before he released many more. I was a bit inspired. I like talking about the game and wanted to get my thoughts out there. Um, let's just get right into it. First up is Acid Splash. And, actually, I should talk a little bit about how I'm going to rate them. I think S is going to be best of the best. Always take these cantrips. A and to some extent B are going to be like solid choices. You're going to find yourself casting these a lot. A is just going to be a little bit stronger overall. C is going to be maybe the situational cantrips, or you may take them because you don't have better options. And then D is going to be the ones that you're very rarely going to take, and probably even if you do take them, you're not going to cast them very often, even in niche scenarios. So let's kind of get right into it with Acid Splash. And Acid Splash is a damaging cantrip, and it has a dexterity save to negate it. It's got a 60-foot range and a 7-foot radius. It's the only AoE damaging cantrip, which is unique. It does acid damage, which is solid. I think acid is a pretty good damage type. There are some enemies immune to it, but it's not often resisted. And it's got a couple unique things going for it, but unfortunately, the 1d6 damage is just not enough. Even getting it up to at level 10 to 3d6, that's what, 10.5 damage on average? That is pretty pitiful. I'm really not a fan of the spell. I think, when you're a wizard, you might as well scribe it, at least. And I do think it could have some very niche cases, just for the fact that it's the only AoE cantrip. And I think there's a bit of synergy there with perhaps Call the Weak, the Illithid power, where this would be your best cantrip to eliminate maybe multiple weak enemies at once. I do think there's some value there for sure. And I think it's fun. It's decent enough to scribe if you're a wizard, but I'm never going to choose this on any of my characters. It's just overall too weak. Doesn't do enough damage. So Acid Splash for me is going to go into D tier. Blade Ward. Blade Ward is next. Let me pull that one up. So Blade Ward is not a damaging cantrip, and it's one of the first utility ones. When you cast it, you, for 2 turns, only take half damage from physical damage. What do I think of this spell? I think as an action, it doesn't really give you that much. It's like actually a really strong ability. I think taking half damage from physical damage is really solid, but the opportunity cost of damage is too high. It's just too high. Typically, you don't want to be spending full actions on defensive abilities. That's kind of a general rule of thumb, I think. The best healing spells are Healing Word and Mass Healing Word for a reason. Actions are just incredibly valuable, and using it on a defensive ability is just not good enough. There are some exceptions, but I don't think Blade Ward is one of them. I do find myself taking this cantrip occasionally as a warlock, just because, you get Eldritch Blast and you don't need too much else. So occasionally I do pick it up, but I can't remember the last time I have casted this cantrip in my many playthroughs. I think it's a really good effect. It's a solid effect. I can't deny that, but it's not worth the action. You can get it from other places, and for that reason, I'm also going to be putting Blade Ward in D tier. I think it just doesn't do enough for costing an action. And I will be, maybe I'll decide later if left to right matters, but I will be putting it below Acid Splash. I have casted Acid Splash before, and I cannot really say the same for Blade Ward. Next up is Bone Chill. Bone Chill is the next damaging cantrip, but this one is not a saving throw. It is an attack roll. And that is a big deal. Attack rolls are generally going to be better than saving throws because there are more ways to boost it. And it's possible to get advantage on attack rolls, where it's very hard to give opponents disadvantage on saving throws. So in general, attack roll cantrips are going to be better than saving throw ones. And I think Bone Chill is the first real solid one. It does 1d8 necrotic damage, and this goes up to 2d8 at level 5 and 3d8 at level 10. And it also has a 2 additional features. It prevents the target from healing until your next turn. This is pretty huge. There are a lot of encounters where if you can't stop them from healing, it can really mess you up. I'm thinking in Act 1 there are at least 2. There's the Woodwoads in the swamp. Those can be a little annoying. You're probably better off casting Firebolt, but if you don't have that, Bone Chill can prevent their healing. There's the Lava Elemental in the Grimforge. There's the Boulette in the Underdark if it's burrowing. I think there are quite a few encounters where the prevents target from healing until your next turn is instrumental to winning that encounter. It also has a bonus of an undead receives disadvantage on attack rolls. If you've played this game, you know that there are plenty of undead in Baldur's Gate 3. There are plenty. They come in every act, at every point in the game, and disadvantage on attack rolls for a cantrip that also does damage is a pretty debilitating effect. You know, it's nothing to go right home about, but that's solid. There's also the target cannot help down characters. I don't think that comes up because, you know, when you hit an enemy, they don't go down, they just die. It can be annoying for you if an enemy hits you with it, but it doesn't really play into whether or not you should cast it. So overall, Bone Chill, I think this is up there. I mean, I think it's at the very least A tier, and we might come back and reevaluate later on. But I think this is among the best damaging cantrips, and it's useful in all of the acts. It's just solid overall. I don't really have too much negative to say about it. Let's move on to Booming Blade. Booming Blade, this is a long one. So, Booming Blade is a pretty unique cantrip. It was one that was added in patch 8. And what it does is it adds 1d4 thunder damage to a weapon attack when an enemy moves. So, if you hit someone with Booming Blade, they take the normal weapon damage, and then on their turn, if they move, they take 1d8 thunder damage. This is an interesting effect. I mean, thunder damage is pretty good. You can apply many conditions with it. You know, you can apply reverberation pretty easily with thunder damage. It's also, in some ways, not great because I think there are quite a few enemies that resist or are immune to thunder damage, and it does not do any damage to silenced creatures. So one thing I found that was a little silly was I tried to use Booming Blade on a character that was using the Susser Greatsword, and that just was some huge anti-synergy. And I do find that sometimes I like to cast the silence spell, and this kind of is useless in that case. But overall, I do like thunder damage. I think it's a good one to have. The real power of this spell, though, is that it upcasts very well. Most cantrips, when you reach level 5 and level 10, they gain +1 damage die. Booming Blade gains 2. You gain 1d8 when the target moves, and 1d8 just on your weapon attack. So this is a cantrip that at level 11, which is unique. Most cantrips upscale a second time at level 10. At level 11, it does 5d8 thunder damage for a cantrip. That is pretty ridiculous. That is an insane amount of damage. But on top of that, the most OP thing about this is your cantrips scale at character level, not spellcaster level. So most, your spell slots, they grow based on your spellcaster level. If you have 7 levels of a spellcaster and 5 levels of a martial character, you only get up to level 4 spell slots. Booming Blade, you could have 1 level of, wizard, take Booming Blade, and then take 11 levels of whatever you want, and you will have this 5d8 thunder damage cantrip, even though you're not really a spellcaster build. That's the big power of this, alongside, of course, it being upscaling very well with adding 2 damage die instead of 1. And lastly, most damaging cantrips, you cast a damaging cantrip and that's your action. Booming Blade, this just adds on to the damage you're already doing with your weapons. So you do your Booming Blade damage, your 2d8 thunder plus 3d8 if they move, plus 1d12 from your weapon's damage if you're using a strong one, plus your strength modifier, plus Great Weapon Master, plus everything. This thing does a lot of damage. It can be cast while you're silenced. It doesn't come up often, but that's good to have. And it's just, it brings so much to the table. It brings so much. It's really an incredible cantrip. I can't really say anything bad about it. And I guess one last thing I will say. Something I like about this cantrip is it can kind of weaponize your bonus action. If you're playing a martial character that doesn't always use their bonus action, like say you're a barbarian before you get a Great Weapon Master, or you don't get a kill that round, or you're a fighter who typically only has a couple bonus actions per rest, you can turn your shove into damage. Because you damage someone, you hit them with your weapon, you deal your plus thunder damage on hit, and then when you shove them, you're practically forcing the enemy to move and take the extra thunder damage, the extra 2d8, 3d8, 1d8, whatever it is. So I think this cantrip is, as of recording, probably the strongest in the game. It just brings so much power to whoever uses it. I think Eldritch Knights have suddenly become one of the best melee builds. They were already great throwers, but Booming Blade is just so strong. Next up is Bursting Sinew. This is another new patch 8 cantrip, and this is a fun one. There's no other way of putting it. This is a fun one. So this one is very unique. It's a dex save damaging cantrip, but you don't target enemies. You target corpses, and the corpses explode in a 10-foot radius and deal the damage. Its damage die is a D10, and it does piercing damage. Piercing damage is interesting. In some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. It is one of the most resisted damage types, if I had to guess, but many enemies will only resist like non-magical piercing damage, and I believe this is magical. Excuse me, I go read the notes. It is actually considered non-magical, so that's unfortunate. That is unfortunate. So a lot of enemies will resist the damage. Another thing that makes this spell a little odd is just the whole corpse idea. It's really fun to explode corpses, but it's not very practical. In many fights, you're not going to be able to really position this as perfectly as you would like. You can sometimes get good AoE, but you can never place it ideally. And if the corpse is too damaged, you can't cast this, which is really frustrating for me. If an enemy is killed by fire, radiant, or acid damage, you can't cast the cantrip. That's pretty brutal because, well, radiant, of course, every cleric is going to be doing a ton of radiant damage, and every paladin. Fire is fairly common as well. Acid, it's somewhat common as well. I don't know if the caustic band will cause the corpse to be untargetable, but there's quite a few limiting factors to the spell. The corpse idea, the fresh corpse specifically, it's non-magical damage. There's just a lot going against it. I think, and I actually misspoke earlier. I said Acid Splash was the only AoE cantrip. As of patch 8, there is, of course, this second one, Bursting Sinew. I think it just brings... It doesn't bring enough value for how rarely you're actually going to be able to use it well. I think a D10 AoE cantrip sounds great, but there's just too many hurdles to go through that I think this isn't a very solid spell to take if you're just going for whatever's strongest. I think if you're going for fun, this spell is incredibly fun. I love casting it. As a Death Domain cleric, especially getting to blow up 2 corpses is really fun. Yeah, and something to note is that if you use this on a Death Domain cleric, you can get one person to get hit by 2 explosions. They do take double damage. It is that can feel really satisfying. It's just such a fun cantrip, but there's not enough. I don't know. There's too many hurdles. So I am gonna put it in C tier. I don't think it's bad, but I think it is just far too situational to go any higher. Next up is Dancing Lights. Dancing Lights, I really don't have too much to say about this. I think Dancing Lights is pretty terrible. It lights up an area with an AoE, which is pretty big, a 30-foot radius, and it has a 60-foot range. And, lighting stuff up can be useful, especially in Act 2. There's a lot of times where, it's too dark to see. But I think being a cantrip that costs a full action and your concentration just for light isn't enough, especially when we're going to be going over the light cantrip, which is just kind of a much better version of this. I think there's a little value in this, in that you could use Concentrated Blast after casting Dancing Lights. There are a few other concentration cantrips that are better than this, so they're kind of a better way to get that buff, but maybe you have no other way, and Dancing Lights is what you need. But I think this thing just doesn't give you really any value. It's tough. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is probably the worst cantrip in the game, although there are a few other contenders, but I am going to be throwing this in D tier. Oh, and next up is Eldritch Blast. Okay. Eldritch Blast is the signature Warlock cantrip, and it is interesting. It's a fun one to use for sure. I love blasting people. But let's read what it does. On its own, Eldritch Blast conjures a beam that deals 1d10 force damage. And other cantrips, when they level up, they typically add another damage die. However, for Eldritch Blast, when it upcasts, you just get more beams. So at level 5, you shoot 2 beams, and at level 10, you shoot 3 beams. On its own, this is solid. Um, Casting more beams is in many ways better than just doing more damage because it's more consistent damage, and it kind of lets you split your damage among multiple targets. It lets you use damage riders more effectively. 1d10 is almost the highest damage die you can get out of Cantrip, and force damage is probably the best damage type in the game. There's only one character I can think of that resists force damage, and this spell just does really all that you would want in a damaging cantrip. And on top of it, Warlocks specifically can get bonuses to Eldritch Blast with Agonizing Blast to deal additional damage equal to your Charisma modifier, which can get as high, I think it can get as high as +7, but in, a normal playthrough, you can get it to +6. And because of the multiple beam casting, that scales really well. Instead of, say, if it was 3d10 +6, you're doing 1d10 +6 3 times, which is 3d10 +18. So as a damaging cantrip, this thing does probably the most damage you can get. It's really solid for that reason. And even, Warlocks are the only ones who get it naturally. Bards can get it through magical secrets, but they don't really have any special synergy with it. Another way to learn this, though, is with Spell Sniper. Spell Sniper is a feat that is pretty rarely taken, but specifically on an Evocation Wizard is a pretty good choice, because Evocation Wizards at level 10, I believe, deal bonus damage on their evocation spells equal to their intelligence modifier. So, kind of like Agonizing Blast, as an evocation wizard, you can do 1d10 +5 if that's your int modifier for each blast. And then you're getting up to 3d10 +15 for just a cantrip, with the bonuses of every damage rider being applied each time you cast it. I think Eldritch Blast, not many people are going to argue that this isn't one of the best cantrips in the game. I'm going to be putting it in S tier. Below Booming Blade, I think Booming Blade is broken, and I think Eldritch Blast is just one of the best. So, yeah, it's going to be an S tier. I love this cantrip. I love playing Warlocks. Can't recommend it enough. Next up is Firebolts. Here it is. Firebolt is kind of the most common damaging cantrip for wizards, sorcerers. It's just simply 1d10 fire damage as an attack roll. We already went over how attack rolls are superior to saving throws. I think fire damage it's okay. A lot of enemies do resist it, but there are also some enemies that are weak to fire damage, and getting the 1d10 damage is pretty solid. It feels meaningful, especially in the early game. The difference between a 1d8 cantrip and a 1d10 can really be felt, in my opinion. So I'm pretty happy with Firebolt. I don't think it's, incredible, but I think if you just want a solid damaging option, I think it's up there. I think Bone Chill is better, just because its bonuses are, incredible, whereas Firebolt has no bonuses. But I like it. I find myself, if I'm playing a wizard, casting this cantrip all the time. So I can't really put it any lower than A if I'm casting it in pretty much every encounter, right? But yeah, don't have too much to say about it. It's just kind of your basic cantrip. Let's move on to Friends. Friends is a support cantrip, and it has no use in combat, but out of combat, it does have a pretty solid use case. You can gain advantage on charisma checks against non-hostile creatures. This is quite useful. The downside is that enemies will get mad at you if you cast this on them. But there are a lot of cases where you need to pass a charisma check to dodge a fight. And in those cases, this is just free advantage. I'm thinking of in Act 2, the Tollkeeper Gangoth. There's no downside to casting friends, because if you pass the skill check, she dies, and if you fail the skill check, she attacks you anyways. So there's kind of no downside to going for the friends route. Another encounter I can think of is very early on in the game, the two tieflings, which I think are Nymessa and Damus, maybe, who are kind of keeping Lae'zel, who caught Lae'zel. And with them, you can pass a skill check or you can fight them. And you can use friends, kind of no downside here. And then once they're out of the scene, you can stop concentrating and there will be no downsides. So I think friends has quite a few use cases. I think I pretty much always take it on my party face characters, and I cast it a couple times each playthrough. I think I would probably put it in B tier. Maybe it would be low A tier because I bring it in almost every playthrough, but it does get very limited use. So it's kind of in between B and A for me. Maybe I'll reevaluate towards the end and bump it up, but I'm going to put it in B for now. Next up is Guidance. Oh, Guidance. I'm sure everyone already knows. This is incredible. Guidance grants you a 1d4 bonus to ability checks, which it just bumps up your odds of passing any ability check by 12.5%. I mean, what more could I want? Every single party has Cantrip, or has Guidance. Sometimes even two, just in case, in case someone bugs out and isn't part of the encounter, you want that second Guidance. It's just so meaningful. It's a free bonus to a free 1d4 bonus to every ability check. Insane. I don't know. There's kind of no downside to this. When I talked about Dancing Lights, I talked about Concentrated Blast, the Lithid power, and Guidance is kind of a better version of that. In many fights, you're going to be, if you're talking to someone before the fight, you're going to be casting Guidance for your ability checks, and then once you get into the fight, you will be concentrating on it for your Concentrated Blast. It's great. I mean, no notes. I think this is above Eldritch Blast and Brokenness. It is just the best cantrip in the game. Best support cantrip in the game. I think Booming Blade probably takes the cake for damaging cantrips, but Guidance is up there. I have it multiple times in every single party because of how strong it is. Let's now look at Light. Light simply makes your weapon light up. It costs an action, but this can be cast out of combat because it lasts until long rest. And the object that gets light will have a radius of 25 feet. That's fairly big. It costs pretty much nothing because there's no opportunity cost for casting light, except for, I guess, having a different cantrip selected from character creation. But I don't know. It's just kind of like a free buff. The buff is very, very small, but it can be very meaningful at times. If I'm playing a rogue and it's too dark for them to see, in a lot of Act 2, I just can't get sneak attack ever. Light completely negates that. And it lets you dodge taking damage from the Shadow Curse at the beginning of Act 2. It's really, really solid for that one section of the game. And that's kind of the issue with this, is that it's incredible for the first third of Act 2. But once you get past that point, it's, not really ever useful. Um, for that reason, I think I'm going to be putting it in C tier. It's I take it somewhat frequently just because of how powerful it is during that one specific part of the game. But I don't cast it too much outside of it. I like even though it's free, I don't even bother once I'm done with Act 2. I don't even bother casting it. So, yeah, I think it's going to be C tier. It's got that great use case, but not much else. Let's now look at Mage Hand. So, Mage Hand. This one is interesting. I'm not a Mage Hand fan, but I know some people who really like to push the game use this a lot because it's kind of just free. um, it's like a free companion. It doesn't do much, but it's not bad. It's just kind of a free summon that can do some interesting things. If you're being really cheeky and trying to squeeze everything you can out of an encounter, it can move objects for you, it can throw grenades, and in that sense, this could be viewed as the most damaging cantrip in the game, This thing can throw grenades. No other cantrip can do that. But I'm not a huge fan because the Mage Hand, I don't like that it only lasts for 10 turns. It's very annoying to work with. It's very tedious to use. You can only use it once per short rest. And there are some cases where I would think that Mage Hand would be really useful, and it just isn't. Like, I want this thing to go interact with something for me, and it turns out it just can't really. And I don't know. I think if you're like a super metagamer, like really trying to squeeze whatever you can out of every encounter, do the absolute most, you're probably a Mage Hand fan, but I don't really play that way. I do like to play. I play honor mode for pretty much every run, and I like to challenge myself. But Mage Hand is just too tedious for me to use for too little reward. For that reason, I'm personally probably going to put it C tier. I know for some people it may be up here in S tier, A tier, but I'm just personally not a fan. I don't like using it that much. Minor Illusion. Minor Illusion is a cantrip that kind of summons a little cat, that compels nearby creatures to investigate it. You can stay hidden while you cast this cantrip, and you can cast it while you're silenced. Minor Illusion is pretty solid. It allows you to manipulate people and where they move in a way that is unlike anything else. I find that in my playthroughs, I pretty much always have Astarion and or Shadowheart take this as their elf cantrip because it doesn't use any of your stats. It's just kind of a free ability that you have, and you can do a lot of fun things with this. You can group up enemies for an AoE spell. You can move NPCs around to sneak past them. You can, and this is the most fun I've probably had with this cantrip. I used it to kind of compel allies to move towards a fight to help me. And specifically, I used this in Act 1 in the Grimforge during the fight against Nier. If you side with other Brithvar and get him to his kind of gang to join you, you can use Minor Illusion to bring Dwergar from all over the forge, all over the temple, to the fight and just kind of destroy everyone else. There are a ton of creative things you can do that you can do with this. I just, it's fun, it's useful, It's strong, but I don't think it's very OP. And yeah, actually, here's a couple other things in the notes section. I know you can't quite see it. Um, oh, actually, you can. So the illusion activates traps. That's useful to me. Um, Make it so someone else doesn't. If placed on a vent, it prevents gas from coming out. That's incredibly useful for kind of exploration. I think there's just I don't know, a lot of great things that you can do with this. It's very creative. It's strong. It's not OP. I think this is just a great cantrip. Great design. I'm very happy to have it in the game. I'm gonna be putting it in A tier, probably above Firebolt, because I think it is the probably the best support cantrip outside of the OP guidance, and for everything I've said, I think it's just overall very well designed, fun to use. Not too OP, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really have many bad things to say about it. Let's move on to Poison Spray. Poison Spray, I think it's a bad rap. Poison Spray is a damaging cantrip that deals 1d12 poison damage. And it is a con save. So Poison Spray has a lot of issues. And I guess another thing I should point out, this thing only has a 10-foot range. Most damaging spells in the game are 60-foot range. 10-foot is really meant to be cast in melee, but it does give you a little extra wiggle room. Being a con save is pretty poor. A lot of enemies have very high con. And on a save, the enemies take no damage. So this thing pretty frequently can just do no damage, which feels really bad. The upside is that 1d12 is the highest damage a cantrip can do. It's quite high, and it goes up to 2d12, 3d12 when it upcasts. So there's some value there. But one other big issue is that it is poison damage, and a lot of enemies resist or are immune to poison damage. So there's quite a few issues with this cantrip. But I think I do take this fairly frequently. There are kind of two reasons for that. One is that it just is nice to have a melee range cantrip. In some playthroughs, when an enemy gets on top of your spellcaster, it just is not right to use a Firebolt or an Eldritch Blast because your odds of hitting are much lower, and it kind of puts you in a bad spot. Whereas Poison Spray can be used within melee range with no penalty, like from being threatened or from a target being too close, and it does a lot of damage. So it's not like if an enemy gets on top of you, you can hurt them, which is very good to have in my mind. I think that's just a solid like pitch. It's got a lot of negatives going for it, but I think that's a solid pitch, a solid base to build off of. The other thing is this is a very specific use case. Is Poison Spray has been at times the only way for me to damage the Boulette in the Underdark, because of its legendary action. It must take 15 or more damage to be hurt by an attack, and that requires some very high rolls, some leveled spells to hit sometimes. If you're running Eldritch Blast, you can't hit that damage that early on since you're not upcasting, because of the way you upcast your cantrips. But Poison Spray does upcast very well. 2d12 at level 5 means if the Boulette fails its save, you're probably actually going to be able to hit through its scales and deal damage to it. which I think is very specific but useful case for this cantrip. I think another example of it being useful is the Vivacious Cloak. Let me just pull it up real quick. You gain 8 temporary hit points after casting a spell while in melee. This is not bad. It's not bad. Like it is a piece of equipment that you can get as a cloak that is pretty rare. Like the equipment itself is not rare, but cloaks are pretty rare within the game. There aren't many of them. So this is one you can put on your spellcaster, and it can turn Poison Spray into a decent enough option. You know, you have the chance to deal 2d12, 3d12 damage, which is very high for a cantrip, and you give yourself 8 temporary hit points. I think this thing gets a bad rap, and I'm going to be putting it in C tier still. I'm not going to be putting it in D tier, though, where I think a lot of people do put it. I'm only going to be putting it in C and probably towards the top end of C. Alright, let's move on past Poison Spray to Produce Flame. Produce Flame, this one is interesting. So this cantrip kind of works in 2 parts. First, you cast Produce Flame, which gives you a flame in your hand. This costs an action. And then on the same turn that you casted Produce Flame, you can cast Produce Flame Hurl to throw as fire damage for free, I believe. But if you don't cast the Hurl part on the same turn as Produce Flame, it does cost an action. So you can't like pre-cast Produce Flame and then get a free Hurl on the first turn. And the Hurl does 1d8 fire damage, and it has a 30-foot range. As an attacking cantrip, this is terrible. I mean, it's just straight up outclassed by Firebolt. Does less damage and has lower range. 30-foot range can be felt. Let me tell you. There are times where you think you should be able to hit someone and you just can't because you don't have enough range. We've already talked about fire damage a bit. It's like a fine damage type, but it's very widely resisted. 1d8 is kind of the standard damage die. It's matched by many other cantrips, beaten by Firebolt, Eldritch Blast, Poison Spray. As a damaging cantrip, Produce Flame is not good. It is quite bad. It's straight up outclassed by Firebolt. The one thing it does have going for it is it kind of works as light, as the cantrip light. When you cast it and you're just holding onto the flame, you don't ever hurl it, you emit light in a 30-foot radius. So this is fairly useful. You can cast it at the start of the day, and bam, you have a light source. So I think I'm going to be putting this right with light. I'll be putting it a bit lower because it has the penalty of only being cast on yourself. You can cast light on allies, whereas you cannot cast Produce Flame on an ally. So a cleric that's using, say, the Blood of Lathander can cast light on an ally, and now 2 people have a light source, but they could not do the same with Produce Flame. It does have, of course, the added capability of being a damage cantrip, but it's as a damage cantrip, it would be D tier. So I think I'm just putting it in C tier to kind of show that there is some value in the light source and damage at the same time. I think both, if it were any of those abilities separately, it would probably be D tier. But combined, they both have enough utility that it is niche, and you should consider taking it. Next up is Ray of Frost. So this is the next damaging cantrip. It uses attack rolls, and it deals 1d8 cold damage, scaled up at level 5 and 10 to 2 and 3d8. And it's pretty standard. It's got 60-foot range, and it has one kind of side effect, and it reduces the target's movement speed by 10 feet. This is useful.
minus 10 feet of movement speed just makes it so you can kite people easier. You can hit someone with this cantrip, and it's harder for them to hit you back if they can't move towards you. It also has the value of being cold damage. I think cold damage is a solid damage type. I mean, you can double it with the wet condition. That is pretty incredible. If you're able to make enemies vulnerable to a damage type, you're kind of pushing past what is kind of expected by the game of your amount of your damage. So with a cantrip, you may actually end up doing 68 instead of 3d8 because it's doubled. And encounters are kind of balanced around you dealing 3d8 with cantrips. So it does have that value in being cold damage. I think it has a solid secondary effect. I think Bone Chill is much better than this. But I also think this is better than Firebolt. So I'm going to put it in A tier. I may end up moving Firebolt or both of them down to B tier. But I think Ray of Frost is kind of a good go-to cantrip to use. I think if you're a Warlock, Eldritch Blast is your go-to. And then if you're a Wizard, you're kind of okay going for any of these three. So maybe they do all belong in A tier. I don't know. I'll think on it and see at the end. All right, next up is Resistance. Resistance is similar to Guidance, but instead of giving you a 1d4 bonus to ability checks, it gives you a bonus to saving throws. So, of course, this is much less useful than Guidance. And the reason for that is you make ability checks out of combat, and you make saving throws in combat. Generally, there are some exceptions, but using an action for this ability is pretty terrible. It is not worth it. But it can be worth it out of combat for free, which is what Guidance is pretty much all the time. So I am not totally sure where I'm going to put this. Probably in B tier with friends. I think it has some like mild out of combat use cases, like the Zathis and Fizzibald's encounter. But there are very few scenarios where I actually cast this. I do bring it in most playthroughs just for those specific encounters because it's kind of a free bonus, which is similar to Friends, so that's why I'm kind of rating it in the same spot. Yeah, I don't know. I think Resistance is solid overall. A free bonus is a free bonus, even if it's pretty rarely used. I can't complain. Next up is going to be Sacred Flame. Sacred Flame. This one is interesting. So, Sacred Flame is a damaging cantrip with a 60-foot range that deals 1d8 radiant damage. But it is a save cantrip and uses dexterity. This is, I don't know, this is a mixed bag. This is a really mixed bag. 1d8 at 60 foot is kind of the standard damaging cantrip spread. But its bonus is that it is radiant damage, which is probably, after Force, the best damage type in the game, because you can stack so many damage riders with it, and conditions like Radiating Orb, Reverberation. That's really powerful, and there's a lot of enemies just weak to Radiant, and because you fight a lot of undead. So, I mean, the 1d8 Radiant damage is incredible. But dex save is really bad. A lot of enemies have good dex saves. A lot of enemies have really good dex saves. So you're not going to hit this very, very much compared to other cantrips. Like, I don't know. Uh, I feel so conflicted on this one. And I mean, another way I like to think of it is clerics take it all the time because they don't have a better option. Their only other damaging cantrip is Produce Flame. Or, well, I guess that has changed a bit with patch 8. But they're really pigeonholed into this. And Rangers, the only other class that can get it, never take it because it is so bad. Like, it's just, it is so dependent on your build and what other things you have access to. I don't think this cantrip is actually very good. I'm going to end up putting it, I think, in C tier. It's above Poison Spray. It's above Bursting Sinew. But, I don't know. I think this is just so common only because it is specifically radiant damage and because clerics don't have better options. It's not actually that good, and I'm going to rate it accordingly. Next up is Shillelagh. So Shillelagh is an interesting one. It's only a bonus action, and what it does is it makes your staff or club magical, and it deals 1d8 plus your spellcasting modifier damage. And it uses your spellcasting modifier for attack rolls. This is only used on druids and nature domain clerics. And this is a pretty solid, I think, ability because it's a bonus action and you only have to use it once per encounter. And it kind of makes your melee damage much, much better if you're one of these classes. Because you're pretty much never investing in strength as a druid or a nature domain cleric. So I think this is a very meaningful bump to your damage. And I like it. I mean, it's just... it's solid. It's a good bonus to have. And it's very easy to use. It's just a bonus action. I don't know. I don't have too many bad things to say about it. I think one issue I do find is that nature domain clerics aren't using a staff for very long. I probably only through Act 1 until they get the Blood of Lathander. Although, they might come back with the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. But in that case, they probably don't need to be melee attacking that much, to be fair. But yeah. As a druid, I would take this early on, and I'd keep it, and I'd probably cast it throughout the game. I think the downside is that it really doesn't... I don't know, it's like, it's just buffing something you already have, right? Like, you can always melee attack, and Shillelagh definitely makes it better, but, most cantrips, like, it is the source of damage. I don't know, that might be a bit pedantic, like, Shillelagh, I don't know. You could, I probably should view it instead as just like a 1d8 cantrip. Or rather, a 1d8 plus spellcasting modifier cantrip. Yeah, I think this is solid. I think this is pretty good. I'm going to be putting it in B tier. Behind Friends, above Resistance. I think you take it for both of the classes that you can get it on, and you use it throughout the game. I don't know. Why should I rate it any lower? I mean, you take it and you use it fairly consistently. That just sounds like a solid cantrip to me. So yeah, I'll put it in B tier. All right, and I guess another bonus is that your weapons can still benefit from their bonuses, so you can kind of double dip. You can be like dealing the 1d8 damage using your spellcasting modifier, and also get the buffs from whatever specific weapon you're using, which I think is solid. I think that's very good to have. And I guess the downside that I didn't mention, this thing doesn't upcast, and that's a pretty big downside. It doesn't go up to 2d8 at level 5, it doesn't go up to 3d8. But that kind of makes sense for weapons. But, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I think I'm going to keep it in B tier, and we're going to move on. Shocking Grasp is next. Shocking Grasp is the only melee cantrip. It has the 5-foot melee range, and it does lightning damage, 1d8 at level 1, 2d8 at level 5, 3d8 at level 10. And it does have the bonus that targets cannot use reactions after being hit by this, and it has advantage on creatures with metal armor. So I think this is okay. Lightning damage is a pretty solid damage type because you can make enemies vulnerable to it with the wet condition. And even then, you don't have to like make enemies vulnerable to it. Some people come with that condition, like the Sahuagin and Koatoa. So, it's not like you have to abuse some broken mechanic to do that. It can just, enemies can come that way as well. I think it also has the advantage of not allowing your target to use reactions. That's it's the only cantrip that does it. It's unique in that way. And it synergizes well with being a melee attack roll. If an enemy is within melee of your spellcaster, that's bad news. You want to hit him with the Shocking Grasp, and then you can run away without taking an opportunity attack. So, I think this has its case. It's a good damage type. It synergizes well with the reactions and melee portions. The issue is just that it is a melee spell, which you don't want your spellcaster to be doing. I think I'm going to be putting this at the top of C or at the bottom of B. As a wizard, I do like taking this spell. I don't cast it very much, but when I do cast it, it's for good reason. So I think that probably falls into B tier, where I take it frequently. I don't use it too much, but when I do, it is useful. So I'm going to put that in B tier. Next up is Thaumaturgy. This is the last kind of support or non-combat cantrip. Thaumaturgy gives you advantage on intimidation and performance checks. All right, not bad. I mean, why wouldn't I want my party face to have advantage on those, right? Like, it's like resistance and guidance in that it's a free buff. It's worse than Friends because Friends gives you all charisma checks, but it's better than Friends in the sense that people can't get mad at you for it. There's no kind of downside to using this on NPCs. So I think I'm going to be putting it at the same tier as Friends. I take this whenever I can because it's just a free buff that really helps you in dialogue. It's fairly situational. Intimidation and performance are not the most common checks. Intimidation is fairly common, but of course, usually you have the option between persuasion, intimidation, and deception. So, it does come up fairly frequently. It's a free buff. I mean, I can't complain. It's going to be going in B tier. And the reason, I guess, I'll explain. The reason I'm putting, like, Friends, Thaumaturgy, and Resistance in B tier, even though, again, they're just free buffs. How is that not, like, A or higher? It's because they're not super impactful. I mean, advantage is pretty strong, but you can get pretty consistent at passing your dialogue checks without them, and when they do come up, they're strong, but they're fairly situational. So that's why I'm putting those in B tier. On to Thornwhip. Man, Thornwhip. I want this spell to be good. I really do. So Thornwhip is a melee spell attack roll, but it does have a range of 30 feet. And it does 1d6 piercing damage, and it pulls enemies 10 feet closer to you. I think Thornwhip it sounds really fun. It sounds good. I mean, I love the idea, and like with a warlock, one of the reasons I love warlocks is repelling blast. I get to knock people off of cliffs, and it's really satisfying. But pulling people is much harder to actually like pull them off of a ledge, especially with a range of 30 feet. 30 feet is not enough range to be able to do anything creative with this. I mean, the idea there is great. I love the idea of hitting an enemy and pulling them. But in practicality, it doesn't come up often, and it just doesn't work too well. The damage is only 1d6, which is too low for a cantrip, for especially a single target one. The other 1d6 one is Acid Splash, which is AoE. It does piercing damage, which is pretty widely resisted. Thankfully, this does count as magical piercing damage, so it's less widely resisted. But Thorn Whip, I mean, it's a fun idea, but in practicality, I think this cantrip is terrible. I'm putting it in D tier. Yeah, I don't know. And I guess something I should point out with both this and Bursting Sinew is you have the option of getting enemies vulnerable to piercing late in the game, which maybe bumps them up a little bit, but to me, not enough to move them up tiers, especially when you have to play the game a very specific way to get those bonuses. So yeah, on to Toll the Dead. Toll the Dead is the third patch 8 cantrip that was added in. So Toll the Dead is fascinating. I think it's very interesting. It's a very unique cantrip. So it is a saving throw cantrip, but it's a wisdom save, which we haven't seen yet. They've been dexterity or con saves so far. Wisdom is much better because enemies, they typically have very good con and decent enough dex, but not every enemy has good wisdom. There are many enemies that have bad wisdom, in fact. And the way Toll the Dead works is if the enemy is at full health, it does 1d8 necrotic damage, but if the enemies are not at full health, it does 1d12 necrotic damage. That is solid. I mean, 1d12 is the highest we've seen so far from Poison Spray, and it's the highest we will see. The downside of being 1d8 when they're at full health is real, and you can't, it's not very efficient to attack someone first with this cantrip, but when they're damaged, this is a lot of damage, and it's somewhat reliable to hit. It's less reliable than a attack roll, but it is more reliable than any other saving cantrip. So I think it's a lot. It's the most damage you can get out of a cantrip, aside from Eldritch Blast, for not that much of a trade-off. I'm a fan of this one. I think it's better than Firebolt. So I'm going to be putting it there. We might do some rearranging with these damaging spells towards the end, but I think it's up there. I don't think it's Bone Chill level. I think after Eldritch Blast, Bone Chill is probably the best default cantrip, but Toll the Dead is up there, for sure. Next up, we have True Strike. I mean, you guys know about this one. This one's terrible. It costs an action to give you advantage on your next attack roll. Yikes. I mean, how useless is this? Who's going to use this? I mean, it's... I don't know. Giving yourself advantage on your next attack roll is very useless because it's the same as attacking twice. So if on turn 1 you cast True Strike, and then on turn 2 you do your attack with advantage, you're rolling your d20 twice to hit them. But if you attack them on the first turn, and then attack them on the second turn, you're rolling your d20 twice to hit someone, and you have the possibility to hit them both times. True Strike is not good. It's not good. It's concentration too. Man, that is brutal. Like, at least let's make it not be concentration. Ugh. I don't know. I think True Strike is, as we all know, the worst cantrip in the game. Putting it in D tier. Lastly, Vicious Mockery. This is a wisdom save cantrip, like Toll the Dead. It does 1d4 psychic damage, and if it hits an enemy, they have disadvantage on their next attack roll. That's a pretty debilitating effect. You know, we talked about it with Bone Shell. Disadvantage is pretty bad for an enemy to have. I think the issue with this is that it's disadvantage on its next attack roll, not for its next turn. So if an enemy attacks multiple times, they only have disadvantage once, which feels pretty bad. It is a saving cantrip. Granted, it's a wisdom save, which is better than, dexterity or con, but it is still worse than an attack roll. It's psychic damage, which is pretty rarely resisted early in the game, but later on there are actually quite a few enemies that do resist it. And it's 1d4, which is the lowest damage die of any cantrip. So overall, this thing has very little going for it. It has a decent secondary effect, but all the core mechanics are bad. It does low damage, and it's a wisdom save. I mean, I just don't think this cantrip is useful, and the only reason it's ever taken is that bards get no other damaging cantrip, and warlocks get it for free with Pact of the Tome. So, I think if this was an option, Vicious Mockery would never be taken. I think it's the worst damaging cantrip in the game, even below Thorn Whip and Acid Splash, and I'm putting it in D tier. Alright, at the end here, let's take a look at what we've got. In S tier, we have Booming Blade, Guidance, and Eldritch Blast. I think this is fair. Booming Blade it's got to be the best cantrip in the game. It's 5d8 damage. I don't know. I think you should always be taking this on any martial character that you can. Even if it's like a one level dip into Wizard somehow, like this cantrip is too good to pass up on. Take it. Guidance, you need this with every party. It is the best cantrip in the game, always have it. Eldritch Blast, it's harder to get, it's only for Warlocks or Spell Sniper, but if you're playing a Warlock, I mean, this is your bread and butter. This is a great cantrip to have, and if you're playing an Evocation Wizard, I would highly recommend taking a Spell Sniper for it. In A tier, I think I'm going to keep this the same. I'm okay with this, even though it feels weird to see 4 damaging cantrips in here. First, we have Bone Chill. Bone Chill is probably your best default cantrip for damage if you don't have access to Eldritch Blast. So for wizards, mostly sorcerers, I think it's just a great cantrip to use overall, and I would recommend picking it up. Minor Illusion, you can get really creative with outside of combat. I think every party should probably have one person who can cast it. And as a tip, you can respec your Astarion or Shadowheart to have it, and for free. Toll the Dead is a great addition to the game. It's pretty fun. It's very flavorful, and I would recommend kind of taking this as a secondary damage option. Ray of Frost and Firebolt are both in the same boats. I think in general, when you're building your spellcaster, you probably want, a couple different damaging options, but not all of them. And if you take one of Ray of Frost and Firebolt, I think that is a good choice and worthwhile. Any wizards should, of course, scribe them, but if you don't have both of these, you'll probably be fine. On to B tier. Friends, Thaumaturgy. I think these are 2 great out-of-combat cantrips. I think your party face, if they have access, should take these. It's kind of a free buff. They don't get used the most, but it's good to have. Shillelagh, I take on any druid or nature cleric I use. You don't always get the most use out of it, but it's solid overall, and it is another flavorful cantrip, which I like. Resistance, yet another free buff. Not as good as Guidance, but clerics should be taking this. It's not like they have good cantrip choices anyways, so pick up Resistance. Shocking Grasp is kind of a niche choice for wizards to have, or other spellcasters. I would recommend it, but if you see other cantrips you like, you're fine if you don't have it. It's not the biggest deal. Sacred Flame, it's the cleric's best damaging cantrip. but not because it's good. Radiant damage is of course good to have, but I think this is just taken out of necessity rather than because it's good. Bursting Sineo, solid. Solid to take because it's very fun to use, but you're not going to be able to use it too frequently, unfortunately. But I mean, I do like picking it up just because it is so fun when you can get good uses out of it. A good AoE hit always feels nice, especially as a cantrip that deals a good amount of damage. Poison Spray gets a bad rap, but it's not that good. I put it in C tier. I think it's a solid melee choice. Shocking Grasp is probably a bit better, but Poison Spray can kind of fill that same niche. Light, it's kind of a free buff. It's very rarely useful, but for that one spot in Act 2, very good. Produce Flame is the same way. The light buff is a little weaker because you can't cast it on allies, but it does give you a little bit of a damaging option for clerics outside of Sacred Flame, so it's also in C tier. Mage Hand, if you're a power gamer and you really want to squeeze whatever you can out of every encounter, I'd recommend it, but as a casual player, I don't think Mage Hand is very good or fun, so I have it in C tier. In D tier, first we have Acid Splash. Towards the bottom of the damaging cantrips. It's unique in that it's AoE that you can kind of cast anywhere. Acid damage is not a bad damage type, but it does too little damage to be useful. Thorn Whip is a good idea, but it's really hard to find use with it. It's got low range. It's difficult to pull enemies in useful ways, and it's in D tier for that reason. Blade Ward is a strong buff, but casting this as a cantrip is not worthwhile. You can get this buff from the Hellrider's Pride or the Reviving Hands, but as a cantrip, it's not worth it. Vicious Mockery is quite bad. You should probably take it as a bard just to have, because you have no other option, but it's not very good. Yeah, I don't know. Don't have too much to say on it. It's just not a very good cantrip. Dancing Lights, also useless. No use, really. I guess, the first 4 in D tier have a use, even if it's not very high. But Dancing Lights and True Strike are just terrible. So yeah, let me know what you think of the tier list. If you would change anything, let me know. Let me know why. What cantrips do you like? Are there any you think I overrated? And yeah, have a good day, everyone.